Hi, and welcome to Caterpillar Cross Stitch. My name is Ford, and this week I'm going to give you a quick beginner's tutorial on the 5 most commonly used stitches that you're going to encounter in cross stitch. If you're new here, make sure that you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of my weekly instructional videos. And if you do me a favor and give the video a like and leave me a comment down below, it would really help me out and I'd appreciate it. Also, don't miss out on the other aspects of the Caterpillar Cross Stitch community. There's an amazing Facebook group and Instagram following. There's also a really great newsletter that if you hit the link in the description or down there pinned in the first comment, you'll instantly get 10 free PDF cross stitch patterns worth £60. You'll also get all of our top 10 cross stitching tips, and you'll get notifications of any great upcoming projects and retreats, those kinds of things that Caterpillar releases. Now, there are basically 5 types of stitches that make up 99% of the stitching that we do in cross stitch. There is, of course, the cross stitch or the full stitch or full cross stitch. You'll sometimes hear those called. We also do a half stitch, and then there is a 1/4 or 3/4 stitch, as well as back stitch, and then a French knot. And I'm going to give you a quick how-to on each of those, but make sure you check the channel history if you get confused by any of them, because I do have much more extensive tutorials on all of them. We're going to start with the cross stitch, which you probably guessed from the name is the most important one, since it's what our craft is named after. Now, I made a tutorial on how to start threads just a couple weeks ago, so I'm going to breeze right past that, but I'm going to use the loop start from the front here to make my first stitch. And then each stitch is completed by making a little slash and then crossing it to make a little X. Now, it doesn't really matter what order you do those in, but you generally will want to do them in the same order for each stitch. So if you do the slash first and then the backslash second, or vice versa, you'll want to be consistent with that because the stitches will look neater. If you cross some one way and cross others the other way, it creates kind of a texture in the stitches that you might not like as you get a little more into it. So save yourself some hassle by getting in the habit of always crossing them in the same order. Now, personally, I am a bottom left to top right, and then that bottom right to top left person. That is how I cross my stitches most of the time. Now, you see here I'm making each stitch one at a time, but you can also do it in a slightly different way that's known as the Danish method. With the Danish method, you make the first half of each of your stitches, and then you cross them all later. You'll notice I'm using a term that I talked about as one of the types of stitches, and that is a half stitch. So a half stitch is just what it sounds like. You're just doing the first half of the cross stitch. And that can be either the one that slants towards the right or the one that slants towards the left, but most of the time people do a half stitch as one slanting towards the right. I'm not entirely sure why that is. But some projects will actually call for half stitches instead of cross stitches. You'll fill in an area with these little slashes, and that will create kind of a sketchy look or partially transparent look, depending on the effect that the pattern is going for. So in the Danish method, you make all the half stitches and then you cross them. But if the pattern is just calling for half stitches, then you just do the first half of each stitch and you're done. So there we've got our row of full stitches and a row of half stitches. Now, because we're already delving into fractions there with the half stitch, we're going to talk about the other fractions, which is a 1/4 stitch or a 3/4 stitch. So here's why those are named the way they are. If you think of each X as 2 lines, then those lines cross each other and they cut each other in half. And so those 2 lines are actually 4 quadrants of a stitch. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so with a full stitch, we're using all 4 of them. With a half stitch, we're only using 2 of them, 1, 2. With a 1/4 stitch, we're only going to do 1 of them, but that means that the segment has to end in the middle of the stitch. So with the quarter stitch, we're actually going to be piercing our fabric down through the center of one of the squares. Now, you'll probably notice that that means that there are 4 different quarter stitches. I just did a bottom left corner stitch for this square. Then up here we would have a top left. Over here we'll have a top right. And then down here we'll have a bottom right. The purpose of quarter stitches is usually to be able to create a more detailed stitch when you need to kind of break those squares down into little corners. Now, you might have guessed that if you add a 1/4 stitch to a 1/2 stitch, you get a 3/4 stitch. So if I make the equivalent 3/4 stitches to these 1/4 stitches over here, we start by making a 1/4 stitch, and then we add the half stitch that is perpendicular to it. So if we're doing one in the bottom left corner over here, we get one like this. And then if we do top left, now I do recommend, if you are doing a 3/4 stitch, even if it doesn't match up with the way that you normally cross your stitches, do the 1/4 stitch first. If you try to pierce your needle down through the fabric where you already have a half a stitch, your needle is likely to snag that stitch that's already there, and it just won't look as neat. So if we start with a 1/4 stitch and we add a half stitch to it, we get a 3/4 stitch, and you can see that there are 4 different ones of those as well. So those are also sometimes called for on the pattern, and they often will look similar on a pattern. You can't necessarily tell which is which. The notes for the pattern should tell you. Occasionally, though, you're gonna get a situation where you have a 1/4 stitch in one corner and a 3/4 stitch in the other corner. And that's to kind of be able to divide an area diagonally between 2 different colors. Again, the pattern should tell you which one to do in which color, or this symbol should look a little bit different. The next stitch on our roadmap for today is the back stitch, or the outline stitch. This is used to draw in additional details, or to differentiate colors, or to give just sort of a more crisp look to an element of a pattern. It's really simple. You're just going to start your thread just like using any of the methods that I showed you in the thread starting video recently. And you're going to just make a straight line stitch that runs along the line wherever it shows in the pattern. Now, a true back stitch is usually going to give you the tidiest result, and that's done by moving the thread forward while it's on the back of the project and backward while it's on the front. That's why it's called a back stitch. We're going to go 1 step backward on the front and 2 steps forward on the back. The reason it's better is because that keeps the stitch that you just did out of the way of the stitch that you're about to do. Now, some people insist that you need to do your back stitch 1 square at a time. Personally, I like to do it about 3 to 4 squares at a time. I feel like it just gives me a neater, straighter line when I do that. That's really all there is to this stitch. It's very, very simple. Some people don't like doing back stitching. I do not understand that at all. For me, back stitching adds so much detail so quickly, and you can cover so much ground very quickly that it's really a rewarding part of the project for me. One thing that you will want to note is that while we use 2 strands for almost all cross stitching, for back stitching we almost always use 1 strand because we want that nice, crisp, fine line. So unless the pattern says otherwise, use 1 strand for back stitch. And the final stitch that we're going to be doing is the French knot. This is probably the most dreaded knot in cross stitching, but it doesn't have to be that scary. I've done a much more in-depth tutorial on French knots, so you can go and check that out if what I show you right now doesn't make sense for you. But this is my technique for doing French knots, and it works really, really well. A French knot is used in a pattern to add a detail that, again, the little square X's that we make can't accommodate. It'll be to add some texture or to create a dot. It's often used to put the iris in an eye, those sorts of things. So in theory, it's really simple, but it does take some focus and some practice to get it right. So the way a French knot is done is to start by bringing your needle up to the surface of the fabric. Now, a French knot can and will appear anywhere in the pattern, so I'm going to actually do this one in the middle of one of my cross stitches. And I highly recommend having a table or something in front of you when you're doing French knots, because you're going to need both hands. So you're going to bring your floss and needle up to the surface of the fabric, and then with your offhand, you're going to grab that thread that you just brought up. Now, the more detailed tutorial that I did, I also mirrored this, so if you're left-handed and have trouble following this, make sure you go check that one out too. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull that strand straight up from the surface of the fabric, and then we're going to dip the needle behind it. And we're going to wrap that floss around that needle a couple of times. So you can see we've got kind of the startings of a knot there. And then we're going to keep that on the needle, and we're going to push our needle back through the fabric right next to, but not in the exact same place as where we came up. We need to have a little bit of the fabric in the bite of this stitch, or it will just pull through to the back. So I'm keeping tension with my offhand on that strand, and I'm going to slide it down to the surface of the fabric, because that's where I want my knot to sit. So then I'm going to finish pushing my needle through there, and I'm going to put my finger on that knot as soon as my needle is through the fabric. That keeps it from getting tangled or loosening up. And then I'm going to pull the thread with my needle through the rest of the way, letting it slip under that finger that's holding the knot in place. And then once it's tight, I can move my finger, and you can see that is just a perfectly little spherical black French knot. So I'll do that one more time, a little bit faster. Bring the needle up to the surface. Hold the thread with my offhand. Wrap it twice. Stick my needle back down through as close as possible while not being in the exact same spot. Make sure that the knot slides down to the surface. Keep my finger on my knot while I pull it tight. Give it a little tug once it's tight, and then let go. And again, another perfect little French knot every single time. There are a lot of French knot tutorials out there, and I've picked up each of these little steps from different places, but none of them combined all of those different steps that I incorporate. So that's part of what makes this so successful for me. Now, you are probably going to mess those up a couple of times on your first few attempts, so do it on a spare scrap of fabric before you do one in production on your project. But with just a couple of practices and using all of those steps that I just mentioned, you should be able to get a perfect French knot every single time. So we've covered the 5 most commonly used stitches that you'll encounter in cross stitching, which means that is all I have for you today. I do want to thank you so much for watching. For Caterpillar Cross Stitch, my name is Ford, and I will see you next week.